Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session of the Data Doctor. Today, we're going to talk about filters, and I know we use filters every day. Everybody's familiar with filters, but I want to take a deep dive into filters, in the 6 different types of filters that are available in Tableau, what each one does, and when each one is applied. There are 6 unique types of filters in Tableau, and they are applied at different points in the order of operation. That order of operation is the sequence that Tableau goes through as it creates each one of your worksheets. The first 2 filters, extract filters and data source filters, are applied at the workbook level. They filter out data before it gets into your workbook, and it makes the workbook perform a whole lot better. The next 2 filters, context filters and dimension filters, are applied as you create the data table for the individual worksheet. And you kind of ask yourself, well, wait a minute. If they're applied to that same data table, aren't they doing the same thing? And if so, why do we have 2? Well, as you're going to see, context filters are applied before we create sets, fixed LODs, or top end. Dimension filters are applied after. Once the data table is created, we come back and load that data table with values, and measure filters are applied to those values either at the detail table level or at the summary table level. And then the 6th type, the last type, are called table calculation filters or just table filters. And they're the only filters that can be applied to table calculations without affecting the underlying data. Let's take a look at how some of these work. We're going to start with data source filters. And I'm going to use the Superstore data set throughout here because it's a data set that's available to you also. And I want to start first by just listing the customer names and their sales value. And now I want to come over and apply some data source filters because I don't want all that data in there. Come to the data source tab, and to apply the filter, we can come up here and sorry, Sagar. Okay, and we can add a filter. We're going to filter first on year of order date. And this frame should look familiar. I can select the years of the order date that I want to include in the data. And if you look right now, that total data set contains 10,000 rows of data. We're going to filter it down so that there's only data for 2020 and 2021 in the data source. And when I do that, it says it's going to only keep those 2 years. And you'll see now there's only 5,900 rows of data. If we go back to our worksheet and we apply the order date, you'll see there's only data for 2020 and 2021. And if I were to open this tab, and you're going to see me open this tab quite a bit today, and take a look at the data that's available in the data set, the summary data, there's 1,300 rows of data. That's how many customers are still in the data set. And the full data set contains that 5,899 rows of data. The rest of the data has been filtered out. Now we can also do something else with data source filters. I created an LOD expression, and all this does is it looks at the customer names and sum the sales over the entire data set. I'm going to pull this off of here. And now I want to go back to this data source filter, and I'm going to remove the one that we had in there. And I want to apply the data source filter on the LOD. And we can see that the range of values for customer sales varies from about 2.8 up to 18,000. If I only wanted to look at customers that had over $1,000 in total sales, I could filter out the other customers right here at the data source, and they won't be in the data set. So we're going to accept that, and we're going to go back to this tab, and we can see now our LOD expression is there, as well as the sales, just to compare to make sure that we got the right values. And you can see there are no values here less than 1,000. I'm going to open up this tab, and we can see on the summary table, that's the visible table that you see. There are now 1,248 rows. There's 1,248 customers who had over $1,000 in total sales. Now, the full data set, the detailed data that aggregates up to make that to make this sales by customer is 8,800 rows. So we've only eliminated a little over 1,100 rows of data from the detailed data set to get our 1,250 customers who have over $1,000 worth of sales. Okay. Let's move on from data source filters onto our next type of filters, and we're going to take a look at context filters and dimension filters. And those are filters that are applied as you create the data table for each one of your individual worksheets. For that, we're going to look at this very simple data set. We're going to look at order date, and we're going to look at both category and region in terms of dimensions in that total. You notice here that the sales total is $2.3 million, and right now, and I'm going to open this up again. Right now, we're looking at 48 rows of data, and we're using the full 10,000 records that are in the Superstore data set. I've got a filter on segment, and you'll see that segment is not visible in the view, and I can come and filter out the customer segment. And you can see all these values have changed, and now the total sales value down here on the left-hand corner is now $1.1 million. It was right around $3 million. So we've eliminated quite a few records. But the summary table that we see is still 48 rows of data. The full data set is now only 4,800 rows. So we've eliminated about 5,000 records from the detailed data set. We've changed the structure of that data table. Well, I told you we can change that structure using either dimension filters or context filters. We've just taken a look at an example for dimension filters. Let's see what happens when we use context filters and see why we would use those. And to those, I've changed our table just a little bit. I've added 2 LOD expressions so we can see what happens to the LOD. This first expression does nothing more than this totals the category sales. At the category level, I want the total sales, and you can see that's this column right here. That 742,000 is the same as the total sales, and it applies on every row. And for office supplies, it's 719,000, and so on. I use that to calculate a percent, which is just nothing more than the sum of sales divided by that LOD, which is this column divided by that column. And you can see we get 21%, 28%. So the total for any category is 100%, and it's broken down by the individual regions. Now, currently, I have segment as a dimension filter. That means we're going to apply that filter down here after the LOD is calculated. And when we do that, I'm going to take out the consumer segment, and you can see that my LOD has not changed. The total value of that category has not changed because we applied that segment filter after this LOD was calculated. So that number remains unchanged, but now our percent to total is based on the value of sales in each one of the regions divided by that 742,000, and the values look like this, and the total for the corporate and home office segments in furniture represent 47% of that total category value. Now, if we looked here at the data set, we see that we've got 36 rows of data, and the full data set is at 4,803. It's 4,803 records. I can also apply the segment filter in context. I could place it in the context area, By opening the blue pill, scrolling down to add to context, and you can see now it's been changed to a gray filter. So now we're going to apply that segment filter before we calculate the LOD. And as a result, now the LOD has changed so that we filtered out the consumer segment before we calculated the LOD, and it's 350,000. And now we're getting the total based on the filtered value of the category. Let's see what happened over here in terms of the number of records. Our summary table is still 36 rows. Our full data set is that same number, 4803. So we haven't changed the number of records in the detailed data set. The actual detailed data is the same. And because we've applied a filter to segment, which is not in the view, we haven't changed the number of records in the view. The only thing we've done is we've applied the segment filter before this LOD was calculated, where previously as a dimension filter, it's applied after. Well, let's go to the next step and take a look at what happens when we apply filters to that are in the view and how that affects the total number of records. This is that same data set we were looking at. I'm going to just reinforce that if I filter out the consumer segment, we have 4,803 records in the total data set, and we have 48 rows of data. Okay, but come back and I apply a filter on region. Now we've changed the view. The view no longer looks the same because the central region has been filtered out. And if I open up we're only looking at 36 rows of data. So the structure of the visual data has changed, or the visual table has changed, and the underlying structure has also changed. By filtering out central and consumer, we're not looking at 4,800 rows of data, we're looking at 3,700 rows of data. So the only data that's available to this workbook at this point is this 3,700 rows of data. Okay. Now, we've seen how filters, the context filter and the dimension filter, are going to change the overall structure of the data table. If we apply a filter in context, it's going to be applied before the fixed LODs, the top end or sets are calculated, so those will be affected. If we apply the filter as a dimension filter, as a blue pill, after the fixed LOD and the top end and the sets are calculated, those values will be unaffected. But the change we make to the data table is going to be the same. If we, on the other hand, if we apply a filter that is in the view, we're going to change the structure of the visual data table and the structure of the detailed data that makes up that view. So in steps 3 and 5 here, context filters and dimension filters, we're changing the structure of the data table before we load it full of data. Now the remaining steps 6 through 10, load values into that table, and then we come back and work with those values, either massage those values or use calculations on those values. But we're going to look at two specific steps here. Step 8, where we apply measure filters, and we're applying those on the value that you see in the table or in the detail table. And then we're going to look at table calculation filters and see what they do. I've got that same data set back again, and we're going to take a look at measure filters. Here we've got years of order date, region, and segment. And I can filter on the values that you see in those tables. And as I drag a measure to the filter shelf, a window opens up. And in this window, this top level where it says all values should really say, do you want to apply that filter to the detail table or to the summary table that you see in the view? Well, we're going to start by applying that value to the detail table. Okay. And that opens up. And it says, okay, you've got values in that detail table that range from 0.44 up to 22,000. How would you like to filter this? Well, I only want to look at records, detail records that are over 1,000. So I can apply that. And you can see all these values in the table have changed. If we open up and look at the table, it still has 48 rows of data. That's the same 48 rows of data that we've been looking at. But if we take a look at the detail that makes up those 48 rows, there's only 468 rows in the detail table that are left. All the others, the 5,500 other records, have been eliminated. The only rows at the detail level that are still in the data set are those that are over $1,000 worth of sales. Now I could come over, this is the same data set, and I can apply that filter at the aggregate level using any one of these aggregations. And we're going to apply that filter to the table that you see here. Okay, so I'm going to use sum. And the data here, the data that we see, starts at $4,000. If we apply the filter at 1,000, nothing is going to be filtered out. So let's apply that filter at 5,000 and see what happens to our data table. You can see now, visually in the table, we have filtered out one value. This value was like 4,700. We applied the filter at 5,000. So visually, we've taken out one value. And if we take a look at what it's done to the structure of the data table, there's now 47 rows, 47 vertical rows in this table. You can see we filtered one out. And the full data set that makes up those 47 rows has been changed only a very small amount. There's still 9,900 rows in there. I think we filtered out maybe 30 rows. Let's just expand that filter. We're going to show the filter so we can play with it a little bit. Let's say we change that to, we're going to take out 20. We want to see everything greater than $25,000 in the view. And now you can see we've got quite a few holes in the data. Okay, we filtered that data out. It's no longer available to us. And if we take a look at the summary level, there are 37 rows available. So we've taken out 11 values in that table. But the full data set still represents 9,000 detailed rows. At the detail level, which is kind of like a line item on your sales invoice, it takes 9,000 of those detailed records to total up to the values that you see here where the sales are over $25,000 in the view. Now I've been showing you how you can use the total or the sum of data as a filter. You can also use any of the other measures. I'm just going to show you standard deviation, and I've plotted the standard deviation in the view so you can see what we're doing here. But I could use any of these. We could take median or count or variance or whatever. And the box open and it says, look, you've got values from 230 up to 3,500. What do you want to filter out? I'd like to filter out everything where the standard deviation is less than 500. And you can see there's quite a few holes in the data. And if we come back and just put sales in, you can see we filtered out that data entirely. The sum of sales is only available on those same number of rows. I'm going to take that out now just so we can look at it. And if we take a look at the detail table, our table now contains 26 rows. There's only 26 values that are greater than 500. We take a look at the full data set. There are roughly 6,000 rows of data needed to calculate those standard deviations at the return of value of greater than 500. So we can use measure filters and apply them either at the detail level directly, or we can apply them at the summary level, the view that you see. by how we select that filter as we apply it. We've got one more filter that I want to look at, and those are table calculation filters, or sometimes referred to as table filters. And they're the only filter that you can actually apply to a table calculation. Table calculations are calculated in step 10. Any filter above that will affect the table calculation, but the table calculation filter is applied in step 10 also. And it's the only filter that can be applied without affecting the table calculation itself. Now, I think all of us have used a running sum at one time or another, and I'm just going to open this up so that we can see what it looks like. This is just the running total of sales. And it starts at the first record, 2018 January, and runs through the full data set, December 2021. And very often we'll get a request that a user would like to come in, and what they'd like to do is they'd like to filter out the data for the start of the chart. They want to see like 2019, 2020, and 21, but they don't want to see 2018. But what they'd really like to see, and you can see here, now we're looking at the data starting at 0 in 2019, but that's not what they really want to see. What they really want to see is they want to filter out the data. They want to filter out 2020 or 2018. They don't want to see it, but they want the chart to start at these values that would be January 2019 after the running total has been calculated or the running sum has been calculated. Well, we do that with a table calculation filter, and there's two different ways of doing it. I'm going to show you this method. Here I'm using another table calculation first as a table calculation, and it says if the value is greater than minus 12, which is these first 12 values, then hide, and if it's not, then show. And I put in a show hide filter, and if I hide those first 12 values, you can see now that I can see, starting in January 2019, the values, the running total that actually began in January 18. What we're doing is we're creating a window that we can slide over our table calculation. We're looking through that window, and we only want to see the values that are in that table without affecting where they started and or how they've changed. You can also do this with what's known as a lookup filter, and there's advantages of using this. This is how you would create a lookup filter. It's just a lookup, and I want to look up the year of the order date, and 0 is in the current cell. I apply that filter, and you can see it comes over here, and I can select the values that I want to see. If I filter out 2018, we get that same chart we were just looking at. It starts at 2019. Now, the advantage here is I can look at any time frame that I want to look at. We're moving that window to different positions on that underlying data on that chart. We can look at 2021, we can look at 2019 or 2020. We can move that window to any position that we want to see. Well, this morning we've taken a look at the 6 different types of filters that are available in Tableau. They're applied at different points in the order of operation. The extract filters, the data source filters are applied at the workbook level and make your workbook perform better. Context filters and dimension filters change the structure of the data table. And by changing the structure of the data table, you can eliminate data that you don't want to see in the table. The difference between the two is that context filters are applied before you calculate your LODs, sets, and top end. Dimension filters are applied after. We took a look at measure filters, and measure filters are applied to the value of the table, not the structure of the table, but the value of the table. And they can be applied at the detail level, the individual record level, or they can be applied at the summary level, what you see in the viz. And then we also took a look at table calculations, and those are the only table calculation filters, and those are the only calculations that can be applied to a table calculation without affecting its overall value. I thank you very much for your time. I have written up a blog post on the same information. You can find it out on my blog at jimdehner.com. It looks just like this. And I also have the workbook that you saw this morning available on my Tableau public site, and it looks the same way. It looks like this, and it's up in the upper left-hand corner. I thank you for your time. You can always contact me at Market Analytic 5. Hope to see you next month.